Hello everyone, I'm Janine Kackmar with PHTV Channel 4 Palos Heights, back with our show all about books. On this show we talk about books, authors, writers, publishing, and we have a special guest who'll join in on our conversation. But before we get to our guest, we're going to talk about some of the new releases coming out this month in March. We have, of course, won't be able to talk about all of them, but we do have, I did pick out a few of them by some really great authors who've had some books out in the past, so we'll get to see some of the new things that they have. And then at the end, the New York Times bestsellers will be shown at the end, and you could see some of the things coming out in March. So for our first feature book we're going to talk about today is actually one of the most highly anticipated books coming out in 2017, according to the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, Time Magazine. And it's a book titled Exit West by the author Mosim Hamid. And this author had a book out a couple years ago titled The Reluctant Fundamentalist, which is actually a runner-up for the Man Booker Prize. And it was a story about a bearded Pakistani and a strange American who meet in a cafe in Lahore. It was very suspenseful and was actually made into a movie, very good movie too. But this book, Exit West, is actually a love story between two people who were ordinary people, but they became refugees, and it follows the impossible choices that they had to follow as they're driven from their homeland and they have to find life in a new land. The two main characters are Nadia and Saeed, and they emerge from their country that's torn up by civil war into an uncertain future, and this shows the struggles as they try to hold on to each other and their past and the very sense of who they are. And it tells an unforgettable story of love, loyalty, and courage, and which is both completely of our time and for all time, especially today when there's a lot of situations where people are finding themselves refugees in their own countries. It's a very humanizing look at refugees. So that's the first feature. Our next feature book is The Hearts of Men by Nicholas Butler. And he wrote a book a couple years ago called Shotgun Love Songs, which is still one of my favorite books to recommend to people. And in that book, he explores the forces that bind and erode friendship, and it takes place in northern Wisconsin. His second book is also an epic novel that explores the intertwining relationships between friends and families, set in the woods of Wisconsin, in a boy camp. It's a Camp Chippewa. And it's a story that's told in 4 parts, and it ranges from 1962 to 2022. And it follows these two boys who met at the camp when they were 13 years old. Neville, who was a bit of an outcast, and he befriends one of the more popular boys, Jonathan, who actually has to keep the bullies away from this kid. And they lose touch with each other over the years. Neville becomes scarred from his time in Vietnam, and then when he comes back, he ends up going back to that camp as the scoutmaster, where Jonathan, he marries and has a couple failed marriages, but he ends up being an owner of a very successful company. And their two lives come back together 20 years later, when Jonathan's grandson is at the same camp, Camp Chippewa, where Neville is now the scoutmaster, and an incident occurs. So the story centers around that. But this author really knows how to write very real characters. You feel like they're people that you actually know. And in spite of the flaws that they have, you actually still feel a lot of sympathy for them. And in this book, it explores the way that boys become men and how flawed men can still be models for the young as they grow. And it's been reviewed as a very well-paced, very effective read. So our next book on our feature title is Celine by Peter Heller. This is another highly anticipated book. Entertainment Weekly said this is their top 10 anticipated books for 2017. And Peter Heller was the author, or is the author, of The Painter and The Dog Stars. And these are 2 books that I've read and I really love them. So I'm really looking forward to this one. He's an outdoor adventure writer, an award-winning writer. And in this book, Celine, it's a novel of suspense on a story about a private eye who specializes in reuniting families and trying to make amends for the lost in her own past. Now, the title character is named Celine. She's a 60-year-old woman. She's sassy. She's a former smoker with emphysema. She's a vegetable-loathing artist. A very unlikely private eye, but the readers absolutely love her, and they are already begging the author to bring out another book with this character. But she's made a living tracking down missing persons, and when a young woman comes to her with a case, for her help in a case, it opens a whole mystery, a whole world of mystery that surrounds this disappearance of her own father several years ago. And it takes her back to the wilderness of Yellowstone National Park, and to a case that somebody clearly wants to be kept closed. The author, Peter Heller, he's a very masterful storyteller, and he develops very well-rounded characters, and he does know how to pace a story. This book has been reviewed as a deeply personal novel, a wildly engrossing story of family, privilege, and childhood. And it combines the plot and the natural setting, which are his hallmarks of this author, into one of his finest works to date. So I'm looking forward to this one. I already have holds on that one. I'm looking forward to reading that one. Our next book is titled In This Grave Hour by Jacqueline Winspear. And for all you Maisie Dobbs fans, this is it. This is the next book in the series. It's the 13th installment of the Maisie Dobbs books. And for those of you who don't know Maisie Dobbs, she's a great fictional character, equal parts haunted and haunting. And the author is back with more mystery and adventure and psychological insight with Maisie. And I've read all her books. I've read all of the books in the series, and I remember reading a review by the author. And she talks about when she first met Maisie, her character, how she first envisioned her. And now Maisie is a very British character. It all takes place in England and around the battlefields in France. But the author was in a traffic jam in a rainstorm in California when she remembers seeing a woman dressed in 1920s clothing with a cloche hat and a battered briefcase under her arm. And that was the first time she envisioned Maisie Dobbs. And at the beginning of the series, Maisie is actually a servant. She's in the working class, probably like one of those homes that you see on Downton Abbey. And but with the Great War starting, she becomes a nurse on the battlefields of France. And as the series progresses, she later becomes a private investigator and a psychologist. But in this book, in the newest book, it starts on Sunday, September 3rd, 1939, when the Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain of Britain declares Great Britain's declaration of war against Germany. And a Secret Service agent breaks into Maisie Dobbs' apartment with an urgent case for her assignment for her to find the killer of a man who escaped occupied Belgium 23 years earlier as a boy. So as Maisie is searching for a killer, the country and Maisie both brace for what is to come as the war is approaching its gravest hour, which of course is the title of the book. So put that on your reading list, okay, all you Maisie Dobbs fans. Our next book in our feature list is The Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane by Lisa C. The author, whose grandparents are Chinese, and she's 1/8 Chinese, she draws from this culture in many of her books, and you might be familiar with them. There's Shanghai Girls, China Dolls, and Snowflower and the Secret Fan, which was made into a movie. And in all of these books, she illuminates the strong bonds between women. And this book, it's a powerful story about how two women who are separated by circumstance, culture, and distance. And it begins in the remote mountains of China, where the Akas are a very ancient people who live modestly and virtually untouched by the modern world. And they've lived there for generations, and they work with the ancient customs of the tea trade. There was a village girl there, Leon, who had a baby out of wedlock, which of course was prohibited by their traditions, so she has to give the child up. She leaves it in a nearby town, wrapped in blankets and a tea cake that hints at her distinctive heritage, because that tea only comes from one region of China. The daughter gets adopted by a Caucasian couple in California, and she's raised in California. But neither time nor distance can keep the mother, Leon, from thinking about her daughter, or the daughter, who's raised as a Western woman, from wanting to know her birth mother. So this book paints an unforgettable portrait of the little-known region of China, its people, and it celebrates the unbreakable connection between mothers and daughters. And our final book on our feature list is a nonfiction book titled Ice Ghosts, The Epic Hunt for the Lost Franklin Expedition by Paul Watson. And this is a true story based on the greatest mystery of the Arctic exploration, and it's a rare mix of marine science and Inuit knowledge that led to the Shipwrecks' recent discovery. And in this book, it weaves the story of the lost Franklin expedition of 1845, whose 2 ships and a crew of 129 were lost to the Arctic ice. And it mixes it with the modern tale of scientists and divers and the local Inuit and their discovery of the flagship's wreck back in 2014. The author, Paul Watson, is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who was on the icebreaker that led to the discovery. And he tells a fast-paced story of this adventure, how Sir John Franklin and the crew set off for the fabled Northwest Passage, the hazards they encountered, the reasons they were forced to abandon ship, and they were abandoned at several hundred miles from any Western civilization. And the decades of searching that turned up only rumors of cannibalism and some papers and a few bones, until they combined an Inuit lore with the latest science, and then, of course, they yield the greatest discovery of that area. So for those of you who complain, I don't have anything to read, now you have some great recommendations. These are new books coming out in March. And so you can go to the library, put a hold on them, and you'll be set for a few months there with some good reading. But now we have time to talk about our guest, to talk with our special guest. Today we have with us my twin sister, Joanne Kakmar, who is captain at United Airlines. And as I was getting ready to, I know I told you this, I was getting ready to do the book and film discussion on Sully, the book by Chesley
Right.
Sullenberger, who, of course, was the captain of U.S. Air Flight 1549, who had to make a forced landing on the Hudson River. Mm-hmm. So we saw that movie together. And I know when I saw it, I was like, why did they do this? Why did they do that? I didn't get it. But of course, with your background, you were able to fill me in about what happened in some of those things. So before we get to talk about Sully, why don't you just tell us a little bit, how did you get started flying?
Well, I was 15 years old, and I was selected as a foreign exchange student to go live with a family down in San Luis Potosí, Mexico. And we came from a big family of 12 children, so we didn't do much traveling, as you know. So this was my first airplane ride, and so I was very excited. And so I was walking down the jetway, and I see the Mexicana captain standing there in full regalia. He's dripping with gold on the braid of his hat and down his chest, and it was quite an impressive scene. And so when I got down there, he says, "Would you like to see the cockpit?" I said, "Sure." So we go in the cockpit. It was a 727 for those of that know the 727 back in the day. So we talked, and he says, "Well, you better take your seat because we're going to be leaving." He motions to the jump seat in the cockpit, and which is against every regulation in the United States, but it was Mexicana. They do things a little different.
And many years ago, too. Yeah.
And so I put my seatbelt on. I didn't know any better, so I put the seatbelt on, and off we went. And we got up to cruise, and the captain gets out of his seat. It says, "Here, take my seat." So I climbed into the left seat there and took one look out the window, and wow, that was it.
So you were sold.
Yeah, and then that was pretty much the point where I had the epiphany. I said, "This is what I'm going to do."
But that's a long shot, though, even still from, being from a large family, of course, didn't have the funds or whatever. Then you end up at Purdue University with the flight school there, right?
Yep.
And that's
looked high and low for a flight. That's all I thought about while I was in Mexico, was how am I going to get back in that cockpit? And of course, when we come back, we visited our sister down in Purdue, and I went to the airport and talked to the head of the department, and he told me how much it was going to cost and circle it 5 times, and I'm like, oh no. So yeah, I just wanted to do it, and I knew I had to do whatever it took to do it, which I did.
And it's funny because when I was reading Sully, there were so many parts of that book that reminded me of you, especially when he was starting out flying, how he would tape the mock-up of the cockpit in his bedroom to, like, you know, with the switches. I remember you doing the same thing. Even he had this crusty old flight instructor, and it reminded me of Whitey. And I remember you telling all the stories about good old Whitey, who was a very hard guy, very...
Yeah, Whitey was an instructor at Purdue, former Marine, medically retired from the airlines, and his mission was to kick all the women out of the program at Purdue. He cussed and swore like you wouldn't believe. I learned all kinds of things from him, but
Don't
in
do
the
that
end,
now, okay?
But in the end, he was my mentor,
Yeah.
and he knew he wasn't going to deter me, so he thought, okay, if I'm not chasing her away, I'm going to help her. And he really did do me a favor, because when I got to the airline, my first captain I was assigned to work with came up to
what age?
At United.
Yeah.
What?
What age were you at that
24. And then, yeah, so he comes up to me on the first day of training at United's training center and said, my name is, I'll leave the name out, I'm going to enjoy making your life rough for you, looking like a big tough guy. And I said, psst, you know,
I had to
nice
deal
to
with
meet you.
Whitey, yeah.
Yeah,
You're nothing compared to him, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he actually did me a good favor. He was a good friend, a good mentor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you started United as a flight engineer?
Yes, second officer flight engineer on the 27. I made my way to the right seat of the 727, and then right seat of the 757. Eventually,
Right seat meaning like
co-pilot. And then
for all us lay people. Come on, Joanne.
Okay, and then left seat captain on the 737, and then I'm currently captain on the 767 in Chicago.
So along with your flying now, you're also doing a lot of training, right? You train the captains, the guys becoming captain.
I've been there 30 years, so I've been fortunate to be a line check airman, which is the captain, a training captain who checks the guys coming out of the training center. You fly with them until they get up to speed, the cadence of the line, because it's a lot different than training. So I did that on the 737. And then on the 767, I now part of the captain upgrade for initial captains who are first-time captains. They go for a 4-day leadership course down at Willis Tower.
Okay, right.
So it's a nice variety with the flying and the teaching at the same, you know, it helps.
Right.
Gives break up the monotony.
Yeah. So I know when we saw the movie, I know you don't like to see movies about flying because they're either completely inaccurate or they make it too Hollywood or whatever. What did you think of the movie? Now I remind you again, the book Sully and the movie Sully are very, very different from each other. But the movie, when we saw it together, what did you think of it? How accurate do you think it was?
Well, yes, I'm always skeptical of the Hollywood, you know, version of what happens.
Right.
They like to make things more spectacular than perhaps they are. But I found it to be accurate. I liked the job they did. They paid particular attention to the language.
The verbiage that was used?
And procedures in the cockpit and the NTSB, the whole NTSB investigation afterwards. Yeah.
And that was the part that I didn't quite get. He just had this horrific incident where he had to, you know, very incredibly stressful. He landed an aircraft on the water, and he was in a hotel room. I was like, why isn't he going home to his wife when he's making these phone calls to his wife and children? And you told me later, because they have to be sequestered. It's like there's a whole procedure.
Yeah.
You want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, it's just the NTSB is running their investigation, and the National Transportation Safety Board is running their investigation, and you have to be put in a sequester somewhere.
The whole crew, the flight attendants,
Yes.
the captains, the co-pilot.
Yes, that's part of the captain's duty, is to find, after an incident or accident, to find a place for your crew and keep them there while the investigation's
And
going on.
they can't fly, they can't talk to the media, or
Yep.
is that the case?
Correct.
Yeah, so that didn't make sense when I was watching this. I think, oh my God, this guy needs to get home to his family because they're freaking out, because they're watching everything on TV.
Sure.
They see the aircraft floating on the Hudson River, and you're like, oh my gosh. And the other part of the movie, the captain, who was played by Tom Hanks, the movie was directed by Clint Eastwood, and Tom Hanks stars as Sully. But there's a part where he's, you know, after he lands the aircraft, of course he's asking, okay, you know, how many people, what's the count, he wants the head count, you know, and he's just, you know, he cannot rest, and they show finally later when he's actually getting treatment, when the head of the Airline Pilots Association comes and tells him 155, you know, and that was the number of people that were on board, and you could just see visibly like,
yeah, we call it souls on board. So every takeoff, that's the final count you get is, you know, that's the number for your flight. That's the number.
Why was he so?
You need to be, we're responsible for.
The captain is.
Absolutely. Responsible for everything on the flight. And those are the number one responsibility of passengers.
So even if someone like trips and hurts their foot, I mean, you're responsible for everything that happens on the flight.
Everything that happens on the flight is the captain's responsibility.
Okay. So interesting. So I know, well, you even talked about like the rescue efforts, like the timing of all that, you know, when the ferries came.
Oh yeah, it's just incredible. They're so fortunate.
But even, you know, you can talk about the authenticity of the slides, that when they pull the things out from the doors, that all was...
Yes, very accurate. We practice that when we go to training every 9 months. We do ditching. We get in the old raft with 40 other guys, and we practice putting the equipment on, and you know, so that when it comes to happen, if God forbid, it comes second nature to you. Yeah.
Interesting. I know over the years you talked about so many stories of flying. You know, I have my favorites, but do you have a favorite story about when you're flying? So many, not all stories are bad, okay? Yes, of course, the story about Sully was like an incredible, it was a miracle that everybody lived and he landed that aircraft the way he did. But there's a lot of other things, like you told me the other day, even about the woman that you're from Belgium. She was flying to Belgium, the baby.
Yeah, she had she birthed the baby on board.
The captain?
So. No,
it was the flight attendant. Tell the story.
Yeah, well, just a woman had a baby on board the aircraft over the Northern Atlantic, so.
And no doctor on board?
No doctor on board, no medical help. Usually there's plenty of medical help on a flight, but in this case there wasn't, so.
So the flight attendant had to deliver it? The male flight attendant?
Male flight attendant who apparently had some training with, on the farm, birthing.
Oh, wow.
Calves and stuff, yeah.
Well, that comes in handy, huh?
Yes.
What are some other ones that you had? I mean, my favorite one of my favorite ones is the story about the pizza, if you want to tell people about that.
Well, it was a long night, clear, beautiful night from Chicago to Salt Lake City, crystal clear, absolutely smooth as silk. And we get about 45 minutes outside of Salt Lake, and the dispatcher sends us a message, do you want the good news or the bad news? So, hit me with the bad news first. And he said there's a thunderstorm cell approaching Salt Lake City at a rapid pace, which was not even the forecast. So sometimes they're called dry cells. They build out of nowhere. And so when is it going to hit? Well, about time of your arrival, okay, what's my alternate then? So he gives me 2 alternates. And alternate is another airport to land at when the weather's too bad at your assigned destination. So as we get closer to the field, we hit wind shear.
Ooh.
So we have to do the
wind shear.
Wind shear is when you have 2 opposing directions of wind, and it starts pushing the aircraft into the ground. It's a downdraft. Okay. Preliminary to a thunderstorm. And so we did the evasive maneuver, and co-pilot and I are working together, and all the other aircraft that were approaching Salt Lake also were hitting the winds had changed 180 degrees and got up to 55 knots like that. And so many airplanes were declaring emergencies because they didn't have fuel. It was forecast to be clear. Okay. So we did the evasive maneuver. We escaped and landed into Grand Junction as our alternate.
In Colorado?
Grand Junction, Colorado.
Oh my God, we were in Vegas, yeah.
And when we landed, my first priority was to see if the passengers were okay. And so I opened the door and made the announcement to the passengers and calmed them down. They were quite upset because it was a violent drop in a bank to the left. And everyone was fine. A little shook up. The flight attendants, were a little shook up, so because they were not seated. but nobody was hurt. And we're in the middle of this. If anyone's been to Grand Junction, there's nothing out there on a Sunday evening. And so we had no food during the flight. So this woman pulls the stairs up, drives the stairs up to the airplane because they didn't have a jetway. She must have been late 70s, and she just runs up the steps. She opens that door and she says, "My name's Peggy from Thunderhead Aviation. Can I help you, Captain?" I said, "Yes, you can, Peggy. We're going to need fuel, water, and do you have any food? Because I'd like to feed my passengers." "Well, there's a Domino's." "Good. Let's call Domino's, order 30 pizzas. Let's get these people fed." They came in 30 minutes.
All right.
And,
or free. Wow.
Everybody had pizza, and we waited for the weather to pass, and we were able to get back to Salt Lake.
On full bellies.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, those are kind of things not everybody really hears about, and kind of good endings and that kind of thing. So, and the other thing about that I always love about when you fly, and of course I don't fly as often as you do, but no matter what it looks like outside, if it's cloudy or like we've had such a haven't seen the sun for quite a while, and then in this time of month, this time of year, but every time you go to work, you can go up above the clouds and see the sun. I think that's such a great feeling.
Yes. I mean, as long as I've been flying, it's incredible to me. Every time I'm up there to see, it's the best part of the job, obviously. Whether I'm over the northern Atlantic, flying over Greenland, you see this massive icebergs and snow and the ocean, the water that goes on forever, and then you're over the out west, and it's the best part of the job. Flying the mountains in Anchorage, Alaska, up that way.
It makes you wonder how people even navigated on the ground, like the Westerns and their wagons going over the massive land. I mean, if it looks massive to you up in the sky, 35,000 feet up or whatever, then can you imagine how they're traveling by wagon or whatever? Or I guess some of them end up like the story we just talked about, the Ice Ghost, they veered off course and they end up as a history book,
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. So I know on your layovers that you have, when you fly to one city to the other, you have some time. Sometimes you have more time than other. You have some time to read books. Well, any good stuff you've read lately?
I love to read. I read all kinds of things. Over the years, it's changed. I like the spy novels. I like the mystery, suspense.
Such as?
Oh, now you're going to really...
I'm going to put you on the spot. Never mind. No, you have to name authors.
And now I'm more into cookbooks and cooking and anything on cooking. I love to cook.
She's a very good cook, too.
Oh, well, thank you. I just read Hidden Figures. I read Hidden Figures.
Oh, that's a big book right now.
Trevor Noah's book was the latest one I read.
Born a Crime?
Yes. Mm-hmm. I read Sully just to see what else was in the book.
Mm-hmm. The book is really, the book is about his life. He barely mentions the incident, only much in passing, whereas the movie starts right in the cockpit. When it follows the hearings, so that's how it's very different from each other.
The one thing the book did point out that the movie did not is the co-pilot was his first day on that airplane.
Oh my God, I didn't know that.
Yes, so his first takeoff in that airplane out of training. He just completed training, so he was on another airplane, and he went to training to learn the new airplane, the Airbus. And his first takeoff was
2 minutes and 24 seconds.
Dual engine failure.
God. But he obviously did a very good job. He didn't
Well, that's the best time for if you're going to have something because you're all up to speed. In training, that's all you do, emergency after emergency after emergency. So.
Well, that was good and bad for him.
If there is possible to have a good time to have a bad thing happen.
Yeah. I know you had said over the years, your reading changes for the different things that you do. I remember, we've been reading books since we were little, really young. And do you remember the box set of the Laura Ingalls Wilder books?
Little House on the Prairie.
All 8 of them, all 8 books. And that was like the most treasured birthday gift or Christmas, I don't know what it was, a gift. And we were like, oh, we read those books over and over and over again. And it to the point where, do you remember when we were talking about what happens when we have to go away, like to school or get married? Who's going to get the books?
Yeah, because as twins, they just gave us one gift and we got to split it.
Well, that's how it worked. And so I think we even came up with this plan, like, okay, well, you take the first 4 and I'll take the last 4, and then as time in the future, we're going to swap them out again. So thinking that, of course, when we're grown-ups, we're going to still want to read these books, right? You know,
well,
it's just kind of funny.
They're nice to go back, but yes, they're got quite a bit of mold and mildew on it right now.
They got worn to shreds, yeah. Well, Joanne, thank you for being here. We have, she has to put up with so much of me. She's my audience that I practice on, so she has to listen to me babble about all these books and make all my mistakes, and she's very patient, very encouraging, so thank you for that and for being here today.
My pleasure.
Sure. And then and thank all of you for watching, and join us next time and All About Books.